The 12 opened the gates of hell on the night that changed history forever. One of the most disturbing themes in the entire Bible is the demonic myth of Judas, which involves the deception of Jesus, the direct action of Satan, and the role of evil in our enemies of God's plan. The demonic myth that Judas possessed is one of the most disturbing themes in the entire Bible, involving the deception of Jesus, the direct action of Satan, and the role of evil in our enemies of God's plan. One of the most disturbing themes in the entire Bible, involving the deception of Jesus, the direct action of Satan, and the role of evil in our enemies of God's plan. The disciples lived in a tense and expectant atmosphere in the city of Jerusalem during the Cenacle, the end of the world, and every gesture and look seemed to have an unknown meaning. In the midst of a silent, almost imperceptible conflict, Judas Iscariot, surrounded by friends and the legitimate Son of God, announced the arrival of an aggressor. The presence of evil never occurs too close to the circle of the chosen. John chapter 13 verse 2 reveals that the devil had already sown in Judas's heart the desire to betray Jesus. And in Luke chapter 22 verse 3, the scriptures state that Satan entered Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, inaugurating a series of irreversible events. Evil approached, disguised in the midst of communion, like a shadow ready to reveal itself. There was no judgment, just an endless companion who sees the storm before it begins. Because of the spiritual battle that has always existed at the basis of human history, it is now visible, sensual, and almost palpably present. In this silent moment, it is not just about the fate of Judas, but about the fate of all humanity.
Take and eat. This is my body. Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.
The mystery is not just about escape, but also about understanding what really happened to Judas at that moment. It was more than just weakness or greed. It was the emergence of a much older conflict that began in the earliest days of creation, as the antagonists sought ways to thwart God's plan. They asked each other, astonished, while Jesus' words echoed throughout the upper room. John chapter 13 verse 21 reports that Jesus, deeply moved, declared that one of them would betray him. A heavy silence fell upon everyone, as if heaven itself were waiting in suspense for the next move of the spiritual forces. The influence of evil was not sudden. Rather, it developed like a shadow around Judas, finding a solid foothold in small confessions, unspoken feelings, and seemingly offensive selections. Constantly alert, the enemy seized every opportunity, waiting for the ideal opportunity to intervene. The line between humanity and spiritual influence broke down in that meaningful environment, and Judas became the channel for the adversary to enter the most sacred of circles. At this point in the story, the question remains, who really came in that night? And what was at stake when Judas allowed the enemy to take up residence in the Salvadoran highlands? The moment Satan entered Judas. There are a few Bible verses that describe the moment Satan entered Judas, some as well as those that carry spiritual weight. Bible verses that describe the moment Satan entered Judas and also those that carry spiritual weight. According to John chapter 13 verse 27, and after the morsel, Satan entered into him. It was not a metaphor or a figure of speech. The writing is direct and unequivocal. At that very second, according to Ali, something invisible and terrifying crossed the boundaries of the spirit world and took control of a man who had walked alongside God for years. The force behind this statement goes beyond the quick decision. We are faced with one of the most serious possessions ever documented in writing, not only because of the figures involved, but also because of the lasting implications that accompany it. He was not just any demon-possessed man, like the many others whom Jesus had freed. He was Judas, an apostle, a disciple, a witness to miracles, a participant in the teachings, and an expert in the living word. Someone who knew the tone of Christ's voice, who had broken the same bread and heard words that transformed generations. And yet he became a receptacle for the enemy. This scene cannot be explained without looking deeply into the spiritual structure of the human fall. Satan does not invade without invitation. He approaches, insinuates, tempts, whispers until he finds an open door. And Judas left it ajar for a long time. John chapter 12 verse 6 already gives us signs of his inner inclination when he shows that he who was responsible for the disciples' purse stole what was placed in it. It was a seemingly small moral deviation, but it revealed a dangerous gap, untreated, unconfessed, unhealed, and untreated gaps are direct paths to spiritual collapse. Jesus knew. He knew from the beginning who would betray him. He knew what was in Judas's heart, and yet he was the chosen one. Because even instruments of pain can be used in the work of redemption. Not because evil is part of the plan, but because God is capable of transforming even the most lethal poison into an element of healing for humanity. And in this tremendous paradox, where human freedom meets God's sovereign control, Satan sees the opportunity to touch the Son of the Most High. But, contrary to what the enemy imagined, he was not winning. By possessing Judas, he thought he was overthrowing the plan of salvation. However, as in so many other graces, he was only a blind instrument within a greater purpose. Acts chapter 2 verse 23 reveals to us that Jesus was delivered according to the plan previously established by God, even though he was led to death by wicked hands. In other words, Satan's entry into Judas was not a surprise in heaven, but it was also not forced on earth. Judas chose, and his choice opened the way for invasion. It is impossible to contemplate this moment without feeling the weight of the scene. Imagine the look on Jesus' face as he handed the morsel to Judas, knowing exactly what would happen seconds later. The gesture that in the scriptures was a symbol of friendship and honor was here transformed into a seal of condemnation. But even in this gesture, there was mercy. Jesus was offering the bread, saying silently and directly, "I am still here, I can still reach you." But Judas had already moved too far away to hear. The act of possession was not outrageous, nor did it come with screams, rolling eyes, or shaking bodies. It was subtle, cold, calculated. The spirit of deception manifested itself silently, as is its wont. And from that moment on, Judas was no longer just a man who had lost his way. He had become the channel through which the enemy himself would carry out his final offensive against the Redeemer. Sign up and join us for weekly prayers and inspiring messages that strengthen your